Greetings, everyone. It's September 24th, Saturday, 2022. I'm going to do an experiment here and make it more like a podcast. There's going to be some stuff happening on the screen, but minimal. It's more about doing an audio recording. I'm sort of wondering if I might want to switch over or add podcasting, i.e., purely audio, to my repertoire as something that I do. I notice when I watch or listen to various people on the internet, I have a bunch of gurus, you could call them, teachers from different walks of life. I like to sometimes not be staring at the screen and just sort of take it in orally, meaning orally, not orally, but through the ears, right? AUR, etc. Auditory. So I'm going with auditory tonight. And it is night, which seems to be an appropriate sort of ambiance for audio only. So I want to talk about reasons to disconnect and then maybe recontextualize and reconnect. Disconnect and then think about it in another way and take it on again, retackle. Synergetics, Bucky Fuller's philosophy. That's what this channel is oft, often devoted to, and to people in his immediate orbit on out somewhat. But, it's a niche. It's what I have spent some time on. I am a philosophy major. We didn't use the word major, but what was it? Area of concentration or something at Princeton. And I wasn't reading Synergetics back then. I was reading Ludwig Wittgenstein a lot, among others, right? And his later philosophy is about how the meanings of words, okay, there's a couple things I'll say. Number one, you can derive the meaning by investigating how it's used. And this is not a quick glance kind of investigation. This is you could say painstaking. You should think about like a criminal investigation or something with detectives, like a group of people working concertedly for many weeks or days. Think more in those terms when you think about investigating words and how they mean. It's not a simple off the top of my head kind of thing. And it's not a quick glance at something, because that's the illusion in Wittgenstein's world anyway, that he's trying to break, that the meaning of a word is somehow right there alongside it, and we just have to sort of mentally couple them, and there they are. There's the meaning. So like the word pain or the word toothache or whatever, do you have to be subjectively in contact with something painful to have meaning for that word as you're saying it in a given sentence? Of course not, right? You can have fictional characters in pain. I mean, pain is a complex. It has a trajectory over time too, and that's a pain in the butt, we say. So that's a different kind of pain, and these are all relevant. All these instances of usage. And getting back to Fuller, an important passage that I'll put on the screen a number of it, because right now I'm just going by memory, but there's a very important passage in my mind anyway, called the Remoteness. It's about the remoteness of the Synergetics vocabulary. And where Fuller says basically, I'm just sitting down with my dictionary here, and I'm going to make this, synergetics, this thought system of mine. I'm going to think for myself. And what that means to me is I'm going to look for the best, most expressive words in the dictionary that do the work that I need them to do. Right? They're consistent with my meaning. Like, I've got a meaning, I just need to find the word, maybe, is the way to put it. It's kind of intuition is in the lead. So he picks like a words like gravity and radiation, just those two, to anchor. Like, I'm not saying those are the only two words he picked, but he picked them as an anchoring pair, those two, gravity and radiation. And then he builds on those associatively, right? Gravity associates with, of course, holding together, and radiation exploding apart or going your separate ways and so on. Gravity is cohesive, radiation is distributive, these kinds of things. And then he associates In other passages, radiation with what's tuned in and sort of everyday experience, compression islands, special cases, the sort of events of our lives comes under the heading of tuned in, and that's kind of our radio program, you might say. Just like, a radio program, if it could be all encompassing, you could live it, not just listen to it or watch it or whatever. If a program, because like the way a computer is programmed, when you're running a program, it really just kind of takes over the computer and that's what you're running. So let's use the word program in that sense. And what gives cohesion to a program? You could almost say gives it sense so that it doesn't crash, so that it means something, so that it continues to run, you could say. We could call that gravity in some sense. And there's a philosophical objection right now, like in a court of law. I imagine a lawyer objection, Your Honor. If the plaintiff or defendant or whoever that is wants to use the word gravity in a sort of odd way, let them be clear about that. And better, they should use a word like schmavity. Like they should not use the words we use if they mean something different. And there you get into this whole authority train. You get into this hierarchical, like, who says, gravity has to mean what? Or is it because you're talking about the king's English? I mean, you, the courts, you're saying that you're going to enforce the rules because the king is at the top. And he sometimes, I'm going to use the word, he represents God, who is patriarchal as well. In this anthropology, in this language game, as Wittgenstein said, there's these, you know, imperialist attitudes where only this meaning of gravity is going to be permitted. And if you insist on using the word gravity to mean something else, well, what is the punishment? What is a fitting punishment? Maybe banishment or something. And I think Fuller's kind of almost defensive reaction was, no, I'm just going to be remote to begin with. You don't have to banish me. I'm going to be way out here, totally independent, doing my thing, using the words I want to use. And you can ignore me, but we may see over time that this stuff that I'm into does start to intersect or converge with, he said, merging traffic pattern. That was one of his metaphors. It could be that my vocabulary, you could say, I'm paraphrasing as if I'm speaking as Bucky. You may find over time that my usage patterns start to merge with yours more. And there you'd be thinking about, the zeitgeist and the fact that, that's how it seems to work sometimes. As you drill down deeply, intuitively into your own sort of psyche, but with all kinds of information, you're not just, sitting in a room necessarily. You're going around the world. See, in Bucky's case, we have to remember he's very worldly. He flies his own airplanes. He learned how to do that around Wichita House time while they were fighting over whether to take it to the next level, which they really couldn't. There wasn't the distribution infrastructure. The culture was not ready. It's like these things have to occur organically. And I think Fuller saw that pretty early. He knew, and it was disappointing to those around him, that this was not going to happen. Just not right now. He needed to get the prototypes and the imagination. As Alex says in his book, Bucky kind of pioneered going directly to the end user, the consumer, the ultimate customer, and trying to raise their expectations, right? It's like you didn't know that we could have houses like this, did you? And then the Jetsons come along. It's like the dream of the future does sort of kindle, I think, with Bucky blowing on the flames, nurturing that whole idea. That's why the book's called Inventor of the Future. I think he helped the science fiction writers, the genre, say, we need to consciously think about the future, not just back into it. And that's something he said overtly. So back to gravity, when he gets close to Newton, and he likes Newton, he likes a lot of people. He likes Euler, Gibbs, Newton, Boltzmann. Who else does he talk about? If you go through Synergetics, there's a lot of characters from science in there. that we know about, right? That we learn about in school and stuff. And Newton is one of them. And when he starts talking directly to and about Newton, like when he speaks to the Newtonian physics that he knows, he starts doing, proportional to distance to the second power. He tends to not say squared for reasons we've been discussing, and second power is more of triangle, right? And inner mass connection. He basically quotes the gravitational um, laws that we learn, you know, inversely proportional to the distance and so on. So the second power, two masses multiplied, product of their masses divided by the distance between them to the second power, all that stuff. He sounds a lot like Newton, and his gravity starts to take on the coloration of Newtonian mechanics. He talks a lot about gyroscopes too, and that's where precession comes in. And that's where we generally learn the word precession, from gyroscopes. Also, planetary bodies, the notion of precession there, but he takes the word precession and runs with it. And basically, as soon as you escape the vortex or get out of the gravitational field of, or are free from, or somehow, first it's like there's a 90 degrees, how to put it, there's a 180 to 90 degree shift when you're going into orbit. You shoot straight out, just get away from this, at 180 degrees, and then sort of go into orbit where now your perspective is you're swimming alongside in parallel. Orbit, you could see less as going around and more as just flying along in tandem with, as that other thing spins, right? It's spinning too. Those spiraling, where all the planets are going around the sun, as the sun goes around the galaxy, and you see the moon kind of in a spiral around the Earth, kind of co-traveling with the Earth as almost an equal, like it's another planet almost. I mean, that's its independence in terms of not falling into and not becoming part of. It doesn't get absorbed by. And that's sort of where you shift from 180 degree attraction, repulsion, or whatever. It's attraction in case of gravity, but you switch over to precession as a different relationship. And there's all kinds of resonance here. And if you think about it, a lot of our stochastics, they tell you about, the ideal gas laws and all these statistical methods that were developed for physics. Actually, some of them have their roots in the social sciences. And gravity has use in the social sciences. Gravity means grave, it means serious, it means high momentum. Something with a lot of gravity is also like, you can't just turn it on a dime, I guess. Like a huge freight train that's just trundling along. The inertia, that's the word, inertia, gravity. There's all these meanings and connotations. And I think, when Applewhite says Fuller thought about maybe writing Synergetics in free verse, but that Applewhite talked him out of it, that's a signal to the reader that we're talking somebody who thinks of themselves as a poet, or that what they're writing is somehow poetic. What does that even mean, really? Well, it means highly metaphorical, for one thing. It means taking seriously all the resonances in language, right? All the ways that meaning shimmers and interplays. And you don't just turn your back on that, you work with it. So I think that the way to reconnect with Synergetics, if you've disconnected because he's obviously wrong about gravity. Gravity has waves. He talks about it being waveless. He talks about gravity almost like it's what you don't know, it's what is not part of what's tuned in, it's what's outside your experience somehow holding it all together. It's almost the opposite of experience in a way. It's connected to death in some ways. Graveside, I don't know. You see where I'm going with this, and that's why Applewhite also, knowing this about Bucky, his fact that he's remote and using his words remotely in his own trajectories. He's got his own word meaning trajectories. He's precessionally related to the English language, you might say, to physics, to everything else. He's in precession, not in 180-degree opposition. He's not saying Newton's wrong, Newton's right. He's free of Newton, but he's still got the word gravity, and he still likes Newton a lot, and he still talks about Newtonian gravity. It's not like he's given up on that. But he's not talking like a physicist. He's talking like someone who's taken possession of a lot of words and is fairly confident in his own usage patterns. And he's really just going to be true to himself, you could say, and using his words like in a private sense, you could say. And again, we're back to Wittgenstein. Noam Chomsky I was listening to recently, he says, nobody can really say what Wittgenstein's private language argument even was. Wittgenstein, again, that philosopher I studied at Princeton a lot, an Austrian who then went to Cambridge to work under Russell in logic and was a great logician at some point. He went off to fight for Austria at some point, was captured by the Italians, was in an Italian prisoner of war camp. And that's kind of where he finished writing Tractatus, they say Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Anyway, that was his first work, and it was dense. Well, not dense. You have to take a look at it. It's cryptic or an enigmatic, aphoristic, I think is the best word. But really little aphorisms. And it's almost like at the last minute, you got to connect it all together. It's going to produce a big shift in your thinking. When you've read it and studied it, he said, now you can kick the ladder away. It's like these were like the rungs of a ladder, the stuff you read to get up to this point, and now kick the ladder away because you see it's really kind of nonsense, everything that I just said. But the insight isn't. Like you'll have this sort of realization maybe. And I think that importance of aspect shifts didn't disappear with the later Wittgenstein. And it's partly why he points back to his earlier work in not an entirely disowning sense, but more like, you see what I was after there was using my language in a way that would induce aspect shifts, like different ways of seeing, perspective altering descriptions are coming your way. That's what Investigations is about and what he's saying. So he talks about private language, and Chomsky's like, we don't even know what he means by that, whether it's possible or not. I always think of Jodie Foster in the movie Nell. So I think of Bucky as Nell in a way, if you know that movie. So Bucky comes along with his own thought patterns, and Applewhite appreciates that that's true about him, that he has an almost impenetrable language unless we help the reader decipher it and get back to, what does Fuller mean by this and that. And what you do in that case is just give a lot of special case instances of use. And those are his 8x5 note cards that end up being the Synergetics dictionary. But then Synergetics itself is somewhat written that way, and a lot of what appears in Synergetics is also in draft form or vice versa. In Synergetics itself, it's like, let's get Fuller's thinking snapshotted and excerpts from articles just all over the place. This guy is all over the place. Let's just funnel all of his comments and writings back through Applewhite into a dictionary and call it that. Call it a dictionary. Because what you're doing is drawing attention to we're talking vocabulary and a special case one, Fuller's, a private one in a way. My private sky, all this kind of thing. He's kind of a sort of loner, but he didn't want to be. Like, he wanted to also be accepted. It's partly out of human nature. You want to be part of the community, but also he thought his ideas were really important. He couldn't help but think that. And so his non-acceptance or acceptance did matter to him. And I think, Medal of Freedom, blah, blah, he integrated quite well. He, despite his remote ways of thinking, really out there, you could say, he didn't he wasn't dysfunctional, right? Like I say, he flew his own planes and he was offered the dean of this or that college a lot. It's not just the honorary degrees and opportunities to design airports. And fine, it wasn't the best airport. And India says, well, thanks, Bucky, but no thanks, But they gave him the opportunity and he didn't, just turn it down and say, hey, I don't know anything about airports. No, he's like, all right, you want an airport? I'll do an airport. He did designs for an airport in India and designs for a theater underground at Oxford University and all these things. And did they ever get built? No, not yet. I always think the dome over Manhattan is especially just science fiction. It's to get you thinking. I don't think it was ever practical, and even in his mind, I don't think he ever expected it. It's like, it's kind of, to me, it's those sort of like wide eyed, kind of easy to fool people who think Bucky was like serious about everything, right? It's like if you believe the Chinese encyclopedia in Borges, or quoted by Foucault, is real and you go looking for it, it's like, come on, you know, it's not that literal. And same with the dome over Manhattan. It's about surface area. All those buildings are like a radiator. The way they go up and down, up and down, up and down. Maximum surface area for minimum volume, you could say, is what a city is. So, of course, the heat dissipates easily. Whereas if you just heat a giant dome and don't bother to heat the internal individual buildings, think of the savings. Well, we don't really, we can work it out on paper. But it's kind of disappointing that we're not really studying that for real. Like, where are the giant domes? And I've heard, people, architects say, computer models are now showing domes aren't necessarily that stable or whatever. But I'm not sure. I know I agree because we have those existing domes, right? We've seen the Montreal 67, the Union Tank Car domes. All kinds of domes are out there. Why aren't we still experimenting with them, making them even bigger? And, they don't cost that much. And where's our research? What are our priorities? If there's another ice age coming, it's too bad that we didn't study our domes more, right? You say it's not another ice age, it's global warming, whatever, right? We still need the domes. Maybe underwater, I don't know, right? I'm just thinking it's a major breakthrough, and it's not going to be. The architects basically said, "Don't look at us," right? It was never our idea in the first place. I kind of agree. And then they want to tear down Bucky in all kinds of ways. And I think one of the ways is to say, his physics is crap. It's out of date. He doesn't know what gravity is. He doesn't know what radiation is. He doesn't know anything. He has dumb ideas. And why would you waste your time? And then there's some math in there that might be of interest. Okay, Kirby's bringing that out, but the rest of it's garbage. You could hear people say that, and I'm saying give the guy the benefit of, well, don't even give him the benefit of the doubt. Just realize that some of us don't read it as physics, literally as physics. And that the word gravity, we have enough mental space that, like with Heidegger, when you venture into the space of an author like Heidegger, I'm not saying they're like each other. I'm just saying he's another example of a person who uses words that makes up a lot of stuff. Like how he uses the word being, you got to know German really, and have all these allusions to classical literature and language and stuff. Like I'm not a huge Heidegger fan myself, but I'm just saying we in the humanities we learn to give the floor to the writer we're studying, and we do acknowledge that to some extent they're in control of the meanings of all the words that they're using, and we have to investigate. We can't just say, "Oh, that's wrong," because that's not how we use the word. That's you don't know what God is. You have no idea. You don't know what gravity is. You don't know anything. It's like, no, I just have a different language than you, and by objective standards, I'm not dysfunctional. So let's not jump to conclusions. Is how I imagine that conversation between Bucky and a skeptic. It's like, do you fly your plane? Do you fly your own plane? And how many degrees do you have? How many awards? I mean, Fuller is doing pretty well for himself. and he's thinking in a different way. And there's where you can reconnect. So you disconnected from Synergetics because it doesn't seem to follow physics, and you believe in physics, and you don't want to waste your time. And I'm saying think of it as literature, as American literature if you want, and tune it back in and study how he uses these words and be okay with the fact that it's not the way other people do. That in the humanities, in philosophy, we give an author more latitude and longitude, I guess you could say more space to develop their own vocabulary. And for Fuller, it's radiation, gravity, compression, tension, and precession. Those kind of words, how they fit together. It's all a tensegrity. Tensegrity tends to mean your experiences, your compressed, special case, tuned in events of your life, kind of like Cantor dust or something. You have all these events, but how do they cohere? What hangs together? What causes all of this to hang together and have integrity? There's your tension. They don't actually directly touch each other, really, these events, but they all hang together. And you can sort of flash through your whole life somehow and see themes, see how things connect, see how things change. I don't know. Gravity at work. So that gives you more of a sort of headspace where, okay, I can learn a lot from how Fuller uses words and then shift gears and think in other people's space. Like, you don't ruin your head for other readings outside of Fuller. I can still read Wittgenstein. I can still study any topic, and I don't feel like my head's been ruined because I let it go into synergetics to some degree, right? I feel grateful actually because I picked up a lot of new stuff there. So I encourage you to read it, but don't limit yourself. Don't say, "Oh, now I know everything because I read Bucky." It's like, no, 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 no. Now you know even less than before, if you're lucky, because you're not such a know-it-all. That's kind of the downfall of specialization is you become a know-it-all when clearly that's not what humans get to be. There aren't know-it-alls. There aren't real ones. So if you ever find a know-it-all, I think you found another phony. I think that's the way I treat know-it-alls. Which doesn't mean you have to go around pretending you don't know things that you do, like how to fish or whatever you know how to do, fly a plane. Like, be proud of your knowledge and your skills, but don't be so arrogant that you can't give Bucky any space or anyone else because you know it all, right? Why would you want to learn from anybody, right? So, to avoid arrogance, you want humility, and that helps you read more authors so that your head is not just occupied by only one person, i.e., yourself. That's when it gets really claustrophobic and crowded, is when you're the only one, you're the only one, doing all the thinking. Have more of a community sense of thinking. All right, I won't get into sermonizing too much. I just wanted to experiment with podcasting, actually. I hope that was successful, and we'll talk again.